Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. As always, I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, North Central Positronics, model NCP-1436345-SD.
And I'm King Newbie Matt Freeman, and in my off time, I'm a magical napkin.
Just a napkin?
Magical napkin.
This week on the show, we wrap up the fairy tale story of Tim with his adventure in the Endless Forest, a run-in with a magical tiger, and a magic carpet ride. He shows us the world, Matt.
That's right. Shining, shimmering, splendid.
Indeed. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
It's extremely fun. Extremely fun. Like that was my repeated reaction. Like, this is very dense with imaginative and creative and intense kind of adventure stuff. I mean,
yeah.
Last week it was very heavy. There's a lot of kind of horrible shit. This week it's more just like a kind of never-ending story vibe. Mm-hmm. Very, very fun and just kind of delightful. And I'm excited to talk about it.
Post, the horrible death of his horse, right?
Yeah. After that, we just leave that aside. Yeah.
No, I get you. I mean, I think you're right that the first half of this has always been a fairy tale, but the first half of the fairy tale was like the very heavy part, and this is the adventure part. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And as we found out, you were wrong in your this is going to have a tragic ending prediction. You were wrong, which I think we're all happy about.
I was. I'm not quite on the ball in predicting the directionality of things with King, because the thing is he foreshadows things. He makes you think bad things are going to happen, and then sometimes bad things do happen, and then sometimes they don't. And you're like, but you made me think that they would, and then you're like, well, yeah, I guess that's just good storytelling.
Yeah, I mean I think a lot of what the story is doing is kind of making you think that, and it's because Tim comes to a couple like watershed moments in his adventure where if he chose differently, that is how it happened. But we're very fortunate that our character makes the right choice, which makes this a very kind of morality tale type thing, which makes sense as a fairy tale you tell to a young child.
Yes, exactly. I think we can talk more about that meta element. Like so one thing I want to talk about a bit as we go through things is like how much of this actually happened versus how much is being embellished for the sake of making it work as a morality tale that Gabriella Deschain is telling.
Yeah, I love that. We'll definitely get into that. All right. Real quick before we get into this week's reading, though, just want to talk about next week. As we announced at the beginning of this book, March is a weird month for us. I'm about to have a baby. In fact, as we're sitting here talking on Tuesday night, he will definitely be here a week from now because my wife is going to get induced on Monday. So we're not going to have an episode next week. Well, not quite. We will have an episode next week. The episode next week will be a conversation I had with my cousin that I recorded a few weeks ago, all about the Stand Miniseries. That was a conversation I could not have with Matt for obvious reasons. So my cousin is a huge Stephen King fan. He and I were talking on the phone about the show, and I said, hey, let's just sit down and record something, and I can release it as a bonus thing sometime. So that's what we're going to do next week. So if you haven't watched the Stand miniseries, maybe do that before next week's episode, and then you can listen to us talk about it. We'll be back sometime after that. It's going to be kind of a wild ride, Matt, for the next few weeks. I have to give myself some time to adjust, but we're so close to being finished with season 1.
It's okay, Scott. Everybody's going to go easy on you because you are going to have a baby. We're not going to put pressure on you, right, everyone? That's right.
The problem is not any pressure that anyone else is putting on me. The problem is pressure that I'm putting on myself.
Well, that's always the case. So.
Yes. But we will be back to finish this book, of course. But next week will not be the week, unfortunately. But we'll still have an episode. We want to keep something coming out every Thursday. I haven't missed a Thursday, and I won't miss one now, Matt. We just got to get creative. That's it.
All right.
But let us jump into the conclusion of the fairy tale, The Wind Through the Keyhole. We begin this week's reading with Tim dropping by the Widow Smack's house on his way back into the forest to do that really stupid thing he wants to do. He's at the Widow Smack's house to tell her to send word back to his mother that he's going to be fine, which is a lie. Picking up from our conversation last week, we get this line from the widow. She says, "He fascinated you. And why? For gain? Nay, not him. He saw a bright light in the darkness of this forgotten backwater. That's all. And nothing will do for him but to put it out." So this is kind of, you talked about this last week, that we kind of reasoned that maybe the Man in Black does not have a motive for what he's doing here. Maybe he's just doing it because he enjoys it. And that's not entirely true, as we'll learn a little bit later that he does have a specific goal for Tim. But one thing I find interesting here is the way that these fairy tale stories kind of work, and the way that this story in particular is slotting itself into this fairy tale story. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, that they kind of serve as morality tales. So in that vein, we're extremely forthright with the reader that this is indeed a trick on Tim, right? From the beginning, it's very clear that he's being fooled. We have a character in the story directly tell Tim this, and then by making the Covenant Man someone that we recognize as like the bad guy, the reader automatically knows it to be true as well, right? We're not meant to wonder if Tim is being led into a trap. The stakes for us is, what will the sprung trap do to him, and how will he get out of it, if he will?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The widow smack is really serving that role of the wise old woman archetype here.
Yeah.
And yet again, it's a very Stephen King touch here to kind of relieve us of our vague suspicion that Tim is walking into a trap, and replace that suspicion with certainty that he's definitely walking into a trap.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we've said before, but it's worth repeating, that King really does seem to deeply believe, or maybe the correct word would be understand, that having a concrete expectation and forewarning of upcoming story events is better than just kind of us tripping over the plot as the character discovers it.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think that is to me, that feels fairy tale-esque, right? Like, I just feel like when you're reading a fairy tale, it's not necessarily, is something bad going to happen, but what's going to happen to the person? How are they going to react to the bad thing? And I think Stephen King's mode of storytelling slots very perfectly into that fairy tale type story. Because I think, King at his roots is just very versed in what makes good story. And he's kind of going back to a basic elemental level of how storytelling works, right? And the reason why fairy tales have persisted for so long, the reason why we hear them so much, the reason why they're so well known and they propagate so far, is because it's this really basic element of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I think he just perfectly slots himself into this like it ain't no thing.
Right. Yeah. I think that the fundamentals are the fundamentals, and he can do that with any medium. Like that's kind of the fun part about The Dark Tower, is he moves casually between genres and shows that he can do storytelling in all of them, because the rules are the same, really. Yeah,
I mean, there's plenty of authors out there that say I can't do this, I can't do fantasy, or I can't do mystery, or like I can't write in those genres, and King is like, I think I can.
Yeah.
And in some of them he's more successful than others, sure, but I think The Dark Tower is kind of the biggest example of that genre hopping, that lack of fear.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's a quote here that really ties into what we're talking about here. I'm jumping a little bit ahead in the conversation, but I love this conversation that in this argument that Tim makes about the Covenant Man telling truths. He says, but he didn't lie about the key. It worked. He didn't lie about the beating. It happened. He didn't lie about my mama being blind. She is. As for my da, thee knows. Yar, she said, now speaking in a harsh country accent Tim had never heard before. Yar, and each of his truths has worked two ways. They hurt he, and they baited his trap for he. I love this as just like the mixing of truth and lie. I think this is another thing that you touched on last week before we even got in there. This idea that by revealing partial truths, you hook someone.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to make a deductive error in thinking that, because the Man in Black has been helpful thus far, that his motives are helpful motives. Mm-hmm. When in fact it's pretty much exactly as I predicted last week, that it's all a trap. All of the true visions were just a setup to give him a false vision. I wanted to say I really like the way this sort of storytelling feels. I think it's in stark contrast to what your George R. R. Martin would do in a situation like this, where like there are these sudden, shocking, game-changing twists at the end of chapters that you basically never see coming. And when those happen, you kind of imagine George R. R. Martin, sitting there in his typing chair, just being like, "Ha, gotcha, you idiot." Mm-hmm. But like King is more like inviting you along on his storytelling journey with him.
Yeah,
there's not that, and I love George R. R. Martin, by the way, but like it's a very different feeling. It's a very different sense of being in relation to the storyteller. And yeah, I don't know. don't know if I want to say I like this better, but I definitely like this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you're right that there is like a feeling. There's a feeling I get when I read Stephen King stories where he's like, we talked about sitting around a campfire, but the feeling I get is like you're just on a walk with someone, and he like puts his arm over your shoulder and is just telling you this cool thing that he wants you to tell you, right? And so he doesn't want to trick you. He just wants to entertain you. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there was a meme I saw on the Stephen King subreddit last week that was Agnes from WandaVision, Agnes doing her giant wink thing, and just like the 7,000 times where Stephen King says, but he would never make it to the hospital that day, and just doing the giant over obvious Agnes wink. And it is exactly what he's doing, right? And there's something inherently fun about that. And there's something like you and the author are never adversaries. You're always like on the same team.
I feel like it also makes his stories less vulnerable to blowing the twist, because like there are certain things in Song of Ice and Fire where like if I say like 5 sentences to you, I will have like ruined the entire story for you. Yeah. But that's not really true for The Dark Tower. Like I'm pretty sure if I knew like a big chunk of what happens in the story, I would still have enjoyed the journey.
I think literally the only thing that could ruin The Dark Tower, and I'm not even 100% sure on this, is the very, very end, right? The reveal that it's a loop. And even that, I feel like once you know it, it just becomes so obvious that he didn't come right out and say it. Like that's the one thing that King held on to until the very end.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't like, there's plenty of people who I'm sure have read the story knowing that was the inevitable end and it wasn't ruined for them. So I don't know.
I feel like there's a lot of amazingness to that moment and its execution beyond just the shock of it.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wonder if the reason why George R.R. Martin has been stuck on these books for years and years is because he's really stuck trying to come up with a way to actually write the reveal that fans have guessed for the past decade. And like, okay, everyone knows. So how do I write it in a way that's satisfying, since like half the people reading this book already know what the reveal is? Yeah. And the daunting task of that.
Well, either that or somehow come up with a new thing, which sounds way harder actually.
And I hope to God he doesn't do that. When like a good writer can make that work and make it seem like this was always going to be it. But I don't know. Like I don't like when authors are influenced by that idea. I agree. Like write your stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, a little bit of a tangent, but always fun talking about George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
So the widow goes and gets Tim a lamp, which is I really like that beat because it reinforces what we were just talking about, that. Like, it's such an obvious trap, and Tim is so incredibly unprepared for it that he didn't even think to get himself a lamp to light his way through this incredibly dangerous forest he's about to go into.
Right. We've made a really strong point that like even the part of the forest that's regularly visited by people is full of deadly death animals.
Yeah.
And he's just gonna like go off into a little journey off the beaten path. Yep.
But the widow doesn't just give Tim a lamp, Matt. He gives her something else. A gun. A 4-shot gun with a total of 9 bullets. And I think we can't underestimate how much of a big deal this is in this world, right? We've been told over and over again in Midworld that guns are rare. Guns are things you do not see very often. Tim actually doesn't even know what a bullet is. He's never heard the word bullet. He knows what a gun is loosely, but he doesn't know what a bullet is. And so it's a big deal. And so here's a gun for our protagonist. And you start to see maybe why this was one of Roland's favorite stories, right? Here's a young kid being given his first gun.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's cool.
And then we get this line right here. Joshua said a gun must never be pointed at a person unless you want to hurt or kill him. For he said, guns have eager hearts. Or perhaps he said evil hearts. After all these years, I no longer remember.
Well, it's good gun safety practice either way, Widow Smack.
It is, but don't you love that, like, eager and evil, like these two words that dramatically different in meaning? Like,
yeah, I
the
do.
gun is the tool of the gunslinger, and the gun is the extension of the gunslinger. And you could say the gunslinger is a gun in a way. We've already made this, like, I've made you a gun.
Right.
Guns have eager hearts. Guns have evil hearts.
Right. Yet again, more indication that there's some subtle propaganda going on here. To try to make it clear that this glorious path of being the gunslinger might be a little bit more ambiguous than young Roland is being told.
Yeah, I mean, go back to our kind of stepping outside the story a bit. We have to wonder like what it is about this part of the story that Roland, like what in part of this did he internalize? Because there's a lot of moments throughout the story where you're like, oh, maybe guns are not so good. Maybe killing is not the answer to all the problems. And which part of these lessons did Roland internalize and which didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
So the widow tries to dissuade Tim one last time, but of course she can't. And he sets out into the night. And I love this quote here. He told me the truth about the rest. Surely he told the truth about this too. By the time he was 3 wheels further up the Ironwood Trail, he had begun to believe this. You must remember, he was only 11. Which is like, in this fairy tale, there are very few breaks of structure like this, where the narrator is kind of addressing the reader directly. But this is a really effective use of one. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with 11 being this incredibly pivotal age for characters in these stories.
Yeah. I like that a lot, especially because if it's, I feel like that's something that, you know, the Gabrielle Deschain version of the story would contain, but not something that the Roland version of the story would contain, because he's telling the story to Jake. And I don't think he has an attitude of like, oh, go easy on the boy, he's only 11. I mean, this is the boy who he just allowed to almost die in the Stark blast because he left his dog outside. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that once again, you know, throughout this story, King locks us into the story itself and doesn't allow us to see the reactions from anyone else, right? I mean, there were several times throughout Wizard and Glass where we kind of separated from the story within the story and allowed Eddie and Jake and Susanna to see reactions, to experience reactions to it, and for Roland to kind of address them directly as he's telling the story. He hasn't done that so far. I mean, we've had no part in the Wind Through the Keyhole fairy tale do we break from the format of the fairy tale and address young Bill that young Roland is talking to right now.
Right.
And at no point outside of that does he break and old Roland address Jake and Susanna and Eddie either.
Yeah. Good point.
So we're kind of left to fill in the blanks of like what the reaction to this stuff is, how the characters are reacting to certain things. Like you talked about last week when we realize it's the Man in Black, and in this week's reading, the text just comes right out and says it. And we kind of have to imagine what Jake and Eddie and Susanna's response to that would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't even know what to think about certain things here. Cause like if the note is from like we know Randall Flagg, aka Martin Broadcloak, and it's like, okay, but what does that mean to Gabriella Deschain, for example, and what does that mean to Roland, and and part of me is almost like, is Roland just embellishing this and kind of embroidering it with like details from their own journey, or like, and I know that I'm getting too meta there. Like, what it is that Stephen King wanted to tell this tale of old Midworld that was sort of disconnected from the Kottet's journey, but sort of embedded within it. So like honestly, my supposition at this point is like, this is, and maybe I'm wrong and you can push back on this too, is like, this is what actually happened. And the version that Gabriella tells and the version that Roland tells don't actually sound like this. Like, because this is the true story. And the fairy tale story maybe leaves some things out and adds some other things in. That's my, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, the other thing that we kind of talked about last week was this idea that Roland has made this character from the story into Martin Broadcloak, into the Man in Black, into Randall Flagg, right? That perhaps in the original version of the story and the one that was in the book, that's not who this guy was. He was just some evil wizard. And Roland has internalized the story so much that when he retells it, that character becomes Randall Flagg. And it makes sense that like all the evil comes from this one guy, right? That all this, it helps you process and understand the evil of the world. There's not two entirely different wizards. It's all one guy. It's all this one guy.
Yeah. I like that. And if that were true, that would really say some interesting things about the way Roland views stories, because it's like kind of an open question to me. Like, is he someone who would take liberties with a story to make it connect with his audience better, or is he someone who sees stories as having a certain purity that needs to be kept sacrosanct?
Sure.
I'm not really sure what the answer to that is, actually.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Like, if you had to pin one on Roland, which do you think he'd be more likely to
I think
do?
I lean more toward the former, that like he is someone who seems to have thought a lot about stories and understands like different, like for example, a bunch of New Yorkers are just not going to understand certain things.
Sure.
And so you might have to translate it into an idiom they would understand, and then that necessarily changes the story. Like he would get that. He that's one of the things that he gets, I think.
Yeah.
As much as we make fun of him for being slow and dumb, like dumb is the wrong word. He just doesn't. He just doesn't think about the past. Is his thing anyway? Like I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we've been told very explicitly throughout this story that Roland and Stephen King are very alike, right? That they kind of look the same.
Yeah.
In many ways, they act the same. They shared the same injuries. They passed them back and forth. And so this idea that why did Stephen King make this character Randall Flagg? Because we, the reader, would get a kick out of it. We, the reader, would get a kick out. Oh, look, there's a story from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and our boy is back, and he's making trouble again. And so I do think that Roland, if we're saying he's telling the story right now, would probably get a kick out of that too. And so he's going to make it, like, we could just say that it's just for fun. It's just like, yep, you guessed it. Look, and you would get the drop reveal moment of where he signs the thing RF, and it's just like, oh, it was him. Like, so he's an entertainer. I mean, at the end of the day, he's telling this story because they're bored sitting inside this building waiting for the storm to pass, and he's trying to entertain them.
Yeah, it'd definitely be funny if just like after the story, Eddie is like, "Wow, so the man in black," and then have Roland just be like, "Well, I might have added some embellishment," and that would be like enough of an answer for me, you know?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's really fun to think of all these things, and the book does not give us anything to work with here, so it's really just embellishment on our part. But I think that's fun. That's fun with this idea of the stories within the stories, and the idea of storytelling being a motif that is so strong throughout the series as a whole. Like the power of storytelling, the danger of storytelling, it's so prevalent in this story, and now we're nested 3 deep, and so we get to think about all these things.
Yeah.
But back to the story at hand, Matt. Tim heads into the woods and runs across our green fairy friend, the fairy that he was told to look out for. She kind of looks exactly like Tinkerbell, except she's totally naked because, Stephen King.
Of course.
But this is all part of her allure here, right? And we see that she kind of entrances Tim. He's this kid who's kind of entranced by this fairy, and the nakedness is certainly part of that. And as he follows her, he is, quote, dazzled and euphoric and almost drugged. And so it's taken over immediately.
Yeah. This is just one of those moments where I'm wondering if little green fairies are something that I'm actually supposed to believe exist in Midworld, or is this just like it's a fairy tale and so we have a little fairy in it. I don't. Again, sort of related to the conversation we just had. I assumed that there would be no fairy at all. I assumed that the fairy that Tim was supposed to meet was just a fabrication on Walter's part. So finding the fairy, I was like, oh, maybe he wasn't lying. And then it's like, okay, no, there is a fairy, but the fairy is actually terrible. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to actually believe about certain of these things. And I guess it doesn't actually matter. It's just something that is fun to talk about. Yeah.
I mean, I think with a fairy tale story like this, you just got to let it wash over you. Yeah. Like what if this is real? It doesn't matter. It's just right. This is the story as presented.
Yeah, I guess I should say, like, as I'm reading / audiobook listening to this, I'm not thinking about this kind of thing. It's more like when we sit down to talk about it, it's fun to examine the story in this way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Another thing this fairy made me think about is that it's kind of interesting seeing this naked woman fairy in this relation to this recurring motif we've had throughout the story of women are evil and are trying to trick you motif. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because we have the widow Smack and we have Tim's mother examples of, good, quote unquote, good women, in comparison to, and then of course we'll get Tim's good fairy a little bit later in the story as well. But it seems like in this society that we're being presented, it's female sexuality specifically that's seen as untrustworthy and manipulative, right? That we show that Tinkerbell here is naked, and so she's a tiny naked woman. It's the women are gonna allure you and steal your stuff. Like, this is exactly what Tim's stepfather says. Like, this is a recurring thing over and over again, that women use their sexuality, and so it's the good matronly women here that are trustworthy. That there is no sexual connotation at all to them. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I don't know what to think about that, because other than this, it's a downright feminist fairy tale. Like
sure.
Like all of the women in the story are good, are like unambiguously good, except for this magical fairy who,
which, I mean, you can even make the argument: is this really even considered a woman? Right? I mean, the only thing I gripped onto this was the fact that Tim is very interested in her nakedness.
I mean, she could even literally just be like a hallucination that the Man in Black has concocted. Yeah.
No, but I think you're right. All the other women throughout this story are supportive of Tim, are kind to Tim, and it is men over and over again that suck, with the exception of Merlin. So yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, I mean, I just like interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the fairy, who we learn is named Armanita, leads Tim into Fangonard Swamp. I'm pausing for you here.
Dun, 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 dun. I need to just have that musical cue happen every time.
We need. I'm so mad that we didn't do that after the first episode. We could have been doing that.
Yeah, could have been doing that the whole time.
Every time.
Get a million copyright notices from New Line. Was it? Yeah. Anyway, it's the Fangonard Swamp. It's the Fangorn. It's Fangorn Forest. It's Fangorn Forest. It's a creepy, dark forest with ents in it, Scott. There's ents in the forest. We're gonna meet the ents.
I mean,
you're gonna try to call them forest people or swamp people or some shit like that. They're ents.
Are they ents though?
They're people that are plants. They're plants that are people. They're plant people, which is what ents are.
All right, I'll let you have it. No, I of course I knew this was coming, and I couldn't wait. Like, there's some times where I want to like be in the room with you when you're reading this stuff, because I mean, sometimes you just do it because I think you started listening right after we finished recording last week.
I did.
And so I was up editing the show, and at like 12 o'clock you're like, Fangonard, and I think that's all you said to me.
Yeah. That was before I even met the ents. So
yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So eventually Tim is led by the fairy onto not a tussock in the middle of the swamp, but the head of a fucking dragon he jumps onto. So there are dragons in the story. You thought there weren't any dragons, Matt, but look, here's a dragon.
Yeah. I was surprised to see a dragon, I'll admit. Yeah, I mean, this bit was actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really like Tim pisses off a dragon, wakes up a dragon, leaps off the dragon's head onto this small island in the middle of the swamp, and then he basically begs the dragon to spare him, and she does, right?
Yeah. I love the idea of this dragon, which is like it's like a wild creature. It just hangs out under the surface of a swamp, but it can actually be appeased by like good manners and by giving it offerings.
Yeah, it's a really interesting fairy tale creature in that it does not behave like an animal, and very few of the quote unquote animals in the story actually behave like animals. I think the only exception is the crocodile like things in the swamp that are trying to eat Tim, which is also coincidentally the only thing Tim does any violence to at all in this story.
That's true, and those are like muty alligators.
Something, yeah. We don't really,
somehow makes it worse. To me, I don't know. They're definitely, at first I just figured they were alligators, and then it's made very clear that they are not normal alligators.
Yeah, nothing in the story is a normal anything. But yeah, so Tim survives the dragon, but finds himself stuck on this island. He doesn't know what to do. The muty alligators are getting closer and closer. And this is, the all is lost moment where he realizes he's been tricked and led astray. He, of course, realizes that the Widow Smack was right the entire time. and he's doomed. And it's a really great low moment of the story.
Yeah.
But he's not going down without a fight, Matt. He pulls out that gun and he blows the head off one of those approaching monster alligators. And I love this because one of my favorite things that King does throughout this series is show this absolutely transformative power that guns hand to people. Like, we've talked about the symbolic power of guns a lot over the last year. You know, you and I have talked about it in relation to the other stories we've read, Worm and Ward, in which, you know, people have superpowers and guns are treated as something different and beyond the use of powers. But in this story, they have a very specific kind of symbol to them as well. And this is power. This is, you know, you take it up and you're not the same person. You go cold in some ways. You change. You become the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what this says here. Come on, he shouted at the reptiles that were now swimming back and forth in an agitated fashion. Come on, have some more. Nor was this bravado. Tim discovered he actually wanted them to come. Nothing, not even his father's axe, which he still carried in his belt, had ever felt so divinely right to him as did the heavy weight of the force shot in his left hand.
Yeah, it's the great equalizer, right?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of addictive in certain ways, right?
Yeah, it's this sort of borrowed power, right? It's the power to kill and to defend the self or to kill aggressively. I think that's why it's a kind of interestingly ambiguous symbol that the gun is in these stories, because our heroic characters are usually trying, at least, to use guns and weapons and killing to defend the weak, to defend the innocent, for the good, for the white.
Yeah.
But a gun is it's an ambiguous tool. It can be used for killing anyone. It kills anyone you point it at. Can be used by evil just as well as good.
Yeah, it's not intimate. It's unearned in a lot of ways. Like, all you have to do is pick it up, and suddenly you have this almost undefeatable power.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to make the distinction between the gun and the gunslinger. And I think this really kind of transitions nicely into what happens next, which is that he shoots this gun, he kills this creature, and the mud people of the Fengonard are clapping for him. And Tim immediately interprets this as, they see me, they think I'm a gunslinger. I have a gun, they're assuming I'm a gunslinger. And I mean, this is going to play in big ways as we learn more and more about these ents. I'll call them ents. And maybe why they think of Tim this way. And it goes beyond just the fact that he shot a crocodile in the face with his gun at close range.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I kind of wish that we'd tracked the way guns are used in the story more, you know, throughout the story, throughout the entirety of the gunslinger, of the, you know, the Dark Tower. I mean, not that we didn't talk about it at all. It's just, even at this point, I'm not sure if I understand fully what Stephen King wants us to walk away with, you know, thinking about guns. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, we can maybe try to isolate it down to just this story, not the entirety of the Dark Tower, because there are many. I think you're right that it is ambiguous. We were supposed to feel ambiguous about it. There are moments where, obviously, as you said, our characters use guns to protect the innocent, to save people, to stop the bad guys. But we also see the transformative power of them to turn you into something else. It makes you cold. Like I said, it's this indirect, detached, distance form of violence. You pull a trigger and something else 10 yards away, 100 yards away dies, ceases to exist. And it is scarily powerful. And there is a way to kind of lose yourself in that power. And I think we see our characters do that in times. And I think one of the big worries throughout the course of this story is the potential for Tim to succumb to that power. And I think there are moments when he goes from being the scared boy who's killing this thing as just like, I'm not going to go down without a fight, to a person who's like gleefully inviting more, come have some more.
Yeah.
Not just having the gun in your hand, but pulling the trigger, feeling the power go through your arm and take the life of something is intoxicating to him. It feels divinely right. And I mean, this is kind of going into a bunch of things, because it could feel divinely right specifically because, as we'll learn later, he is a gunslinger. He is going to be a gunslinger, and we don't know exactly who. We've never heard of this kid before now, but we're told later that he's going to go on adventures, and he's going to leave tree and range across the world, and so he's going to be a powerful gunslinger. But it's
there was a moment somewhere in here where I was like, oh, are we going to find out that Tim's last name is Deshane? And then I remember that we already know Tim's name, and it is not.
No, I'm sorry.
Maybe he changes his last name later, though.
Could be.
Something popped in my head while you were going through that, analysis of guns, and I just kind of remembered the story is, tends to be kind of pro magic and humanity and anti machines.
Mm-hmm.
And a gun is a machine, and Roland even thinks of and calls the gun a machine at times. Yes. And I mean, like the idea that it's a machine that allows you to just point it at someone, distant from you and kill them. That is a strictly speaking very dehumanizing way of killing. So I think there's something to that.
Yeah, and I mean, like with any other machine, this is what I love about King, is that he doesn't give us an easy one. It'd be easy to just be able to conclude this is what guns mean, and they mean bad. But that's not true, because even the machines in the course of the story are things that we're seen oftentimes with pity and with understanding and with kindness, especially in the latter half of the books. I think early in the books, like we had characters like Blaine, who we just hated, but the more we learned about the North Central Positronic robots in the story, the more we were seen to pity them in a way. And we will be introduced to another one in this story that we have similar feelings about.
Right. And I mean, King definitely romanticizes these giant badass revolvers that Roland carries, and
yes,
makes it clear that like this is as terrible and evil as the concept is. This is a cool looking object.
Yes. I mean, it's like what I always say about drug use, right? Like if you didn't depict it as cool, like you wouldn't be being true to the thing.
Yeah.
Like drugs feel good to use. Like there's a power in guns, and to depict them dishonestly would be to say, no, these are never cool.
Right. You
don't feel cool holding a gun. That's just, I'm sorry. It's not reality.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a very worthy subject of analysis, by the way, because I'm remembering something that we said in a podcast when we were talking about the story Dune, where I believe the point that I made was like, you can tell a lot from the weapons that are central in a story. Like Luke Skywalker uses a lightsaber, Darth Vader uses a lightsaber. They're these like mystical yet science fiction. They're romantic like a sword is, but they're science fictionized, and like you learn a lot about that story. And then we're talking about Dune, and it's like in Dune, it's a science fiction future, but they literally use knives. They use knives made of either steel or like the bone of an alien worm.
Yeah,
it's a visceral, violent, horrible weapon. Like you have to get up close and personal to kill somebody with a knife. That says a lot about what kind of story that is. And then here we have guns, usually kind of beautiful looking revolvers, although there are guns of various kinds in the story.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about the kind of story that it is as well.
I think you're right. And I can't believe it's taken 62 episodes and 8 books for us to actually have this conversation. I think we've gestured toward this conversation throughout the thing, but I don't think we've ever like sat down and had it.
I mean, it makes sense that it would fit here because we're seeing sort of a character who we know is going to be a gunslinger getting their first taste of gun violence, basically.
Yes. And also the way that King situates the story as like an ancient fairy tale of it's almost like the myth building of Midworld. Mm-hmm. It allows us to see like what in those myths is most important to this world, and allows us to see it through a different lens. Mm-hmm. We're seeing Midworld not through Roland's recollection of the past, but through a story passed down through the years, and it defines the values of the society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we meet the plant men, or ents, as you said, who arrive in a boat to rescue Tim. And once he's back on solid land, he asks them how he can find Merlin. And they play a game of charades and sign both a man with a long beard and a pointy hat, and then a tiger, which at this point is meaningless, but the meaning will, of course, come much, much more obvious later. I love little cute things like this, where like this, and you grow to understand reading this again that everything that these ents said makes perfect sense. They were, showing that Merlin is a tiger now. And they were showing that the Stark Blast is coming, and they were trying to be Thraken, and it all makes sense after the fact. Right. But of course, Tim doesn't understand it, so we don't understand it.
I think the main thing I didn't understand was that Merlin was the tiger. Like I was like, there's a tiger. Yep. I thought that would happen because there's a tiger on the cover of this book. And and then there's going to be a Stark Blast because Roland literally told us that already.
Yes, we did know that already. Yeah. But of course, poor Tim doesn't know it at all.
Yeah, right.
So the helmsman of the Ents gives Tim a small metal disc that it's like a compass. It seems to direct him where he needs to go. And we'll talk about Daria a little bit later. But I love this moment where as Tim sets out to go, he realizes that this tribe isn't responding to his talk, but is responding to his mind. And so they've been reading his minds. And to Tim, this means that they've known all along that he was lying, that he wasn't a gunslinger. But no, right? Mm-hmm. It's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
They recognized what was inside of him from the beginning, and so they know him as a gunslinger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this moment. This is another fun moment in a series of fun moments where, this psychic white aligned tribe of muty ent people just comes and kind of saves the day. And I love them. Like, I'm immediately endeared to them. The fact that they know their death is imminent is also just so, like, I don't know, just sad and bittersweet.
It is. And I think it is part of what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks of this idea of the world as this miserable place, right? These people both know that the Stark Blast is coming and that it's going to kill them because they have nowhere to go to protect themselves from it. But we also learn that Tim doesn't see any children. He doesn't see any women. And so, I mean, maybe there are women, they're just not there, but this is a dying tribe anyway. Like if the Stark Blast is just going to accelerate what's already happening, that these people are doomed, that they're not going to be around much longer. And so we're seeing over and over and over again throughout this book, more images of a world moving on, of a world decaying, of death, and our characters are kind of powerless to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, world moving on. But I mean, the thing that stands out to me about this moment, or just this whole bit, I guess, is the idea. We've got good muties, because it just seems like everything associated with the decay and moving on of the world has been almost always bad tinged, like corrupted and evil and Crimson King and or Discordia adjacent. But these creatures, they're clearly muties, and you think of that as being, I mean, the only other muties we've met have tended to be either monsters or, I guess I'm kind of thinking about the children of...
Yeah, I think they're the most close to the children of Roderick.
Children of Roderick, right?
Yeah.
But these creatures are like more pure even than human beings. Like these seem to be some kind of like kind of almost holy creatures. Like that's the biggest thing about it that stands out to me of being like ent-like is not that they're literally plant people. It's that they're like pure and self-sacrificial and good. And I don't know, I'm having trouble articulating this. It really struck me though.
I know what you mean. I mean, there is something otherworldly about them in more ways than one. In the midst of this depression and death and uselessness, these are people that are standing tall and recognizing that they can still do some good.
Yeah. It's like they're standing true, even though they're in like the worst possible situation of anyone in the whole story.
Right. And I think the way that King really gets at the emotion of this through the character of Tim, I think is really wonderful, because he has this childlike innocence throughout all of this. He's sharing food with them or trying to share food with them, and they're just like, no. He tries to give them back their metal disc, and when they refuse, he promises he'll return it to them one day, because he hasn't quite fully understood what they already know, is that they're doomed. And so there's this wonderful moment where he says, he raises the disc and says, "I'll bring this back. Good as I found it, I will." Slowly, but still smiling, and that was somehow terrible, Helmsman shook his head. He gave the boy a last fond and lingering look, then pulled the ramshackle boat away from the solid ground and into the unsteady part of the world that was their home. And, it's this really tragic moment that our character really barely has comprehended yet. And it's it's so it makes the emotion of that scene, it makes the power of what these people are doing for this kid ring through all the more, that we the reader can have grabbed onto what's happening quicker than our character has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In this case, you know, they recognize that they are doomed, but they can still do some good, and so they do that.
Yeah, and it's delightful.
Yeah. So just following on this thread, I wanted to dig into their telepathic nature. So you could argue that they all have the touch, because that's the way we think about telepathy in this story.
Sure.
That they all have the touch so strongly that they don't even speak anymore. They just kind of speak mind to mind, basically. They're almost like a hive mind. Like, you get the sense that maybe when Tim's not around, they don't even try to talk to each other. They just kind of exist. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, like, does it seem to you that the more mentally open a character is in this story, the more interlinked that person is with other minds, the more white aligned they tend to be by default? And then you could even say, like, in contrast, the more closed off, the more evil they are. Like, you can think of Walter's thinking cap.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, the whole kind of the collective versus individuality, right? That I mean, that's kind of core to what a quartet is, that Roland is better with people and having his mind open to people. Right. And I think that slots with that very nicely. Whereas, I mean, again and again through book 7, we had the thing that Mordred does the most is emphasize the curse of loneliness and the curse of being alone, of not being part of a group. And we're kind of meant to see the worst possible parts of Roland in the horrible loneliness that Mordred Deshane experiences. Right. So I think you're absolutely onto something there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's very clean. Like, I think about the Breakers, and it's like, okay, well, the Breakers are obviously all psychic, but then I want to say, yeah, but they all have sort of chosen to go into themselves and become solipsistic and selfish.
Yeah.
And like, so they're all psychic people, but they're not using their power to connect. They're using it, in fact, to destroy. And that just, if anything, I think reinforces this thesis here.
Yeah. I mean, the Breakers aren't inherently bad either, right? They've made bad choices, but I think we're meant to see them as complicated people. I mean, I think there is absolutely something to the Stephen King universe of there are these people with powers, and there are people that exploit those people, and it is the people with powers are not typically lined up as the bad ones, right? It is the people that are exploiting those people or manipulating those people that are seen as the bad ones. Mind power is not inherently bad.
Yeah. And of course the Breakers didn't know that's what they didn't know they were destroying the universe.
Well,
I think maybe they suspected, but wasn't it like a plot point that eventually Brodigan, actually saw into somebody's mind and realized, like, oh shit, like,
yes, but I think it was more, I don't think they knew the full scope of what they were doing, but I think they were trying not to ask. I think they suspected something bigger was going on than it was, but they were consciously avoiding thinking about it because they kind of had a feeling. Just, I mean, the same with where they were getting their battery power from, right? They knew something was happening and they were just choosing to look away from it.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. But no, I think you're onto something there, that this idea of, the Shining, the psychic power, this openness of mind tends to, not in every case, but tends to link with the side of good, the side of the white more. Yeah.
Cool.
Tim sets out once again, this time on his own. And when it gets dark, his compass and the voice of a woman asks him if he would like a light. And thus we meet Daria, aka North Central Positronics Portable Guidance Model, Daria NCP-1436345-AN.
Yep.
Can I say I just love the Dark Tower so much for this shit? Like, here we have a fairy tale in the classic sense, right? This is a classic fairy tale. We got going through a spooky forest. He's clearly crossed a threshold into a different world. There are dragons, there's monsters, there's magic, and also there's Tim's fairy companion is his portable computer device thing.
Yeah. He's also there is Siri.
Yeah. And that's just like what King has always had fun with this is taking this technology and just dropping it into these genres in a way that was fun. It's like, it's Western, but robots. It's fairy tale, but your fairy is a computer. It's like, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, the Daria almost takes on the role that you would expect like an animal companion in a Disney story to take on.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Daria gives us a bit more information about where in the world we're situated. We learn that Tim is on the path of the beam, if you can believe it, but not the beam Roland and his friends are on. He's on the beam of the cat, or lion, or tiger, way of the eagle. We even get a little rhyme that Daria gives us that goes with that is similar to our turtle rhyme. She says, "See the eagle's brilliant eye and wings on which he holds the sky. He spies the land and spies the sea, and even spies a child like me."
Yeah, very fun. Really gives us this feeling like we're getting new, meaningful information about this world, this mid-world world.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of think that maybe one of the things that brought King back to this story and this world was he had some more ideas about how to flesh it out, how to add a little bit more information to it. And we've already talked about how doing it through the form of fairy tale is so fun, but we're really getting a lot of mythology of Midworld here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just want to talk about Daria for a bit here, Matt, because in these early moments of Daria, she's barely given any personality, but we'll see very soon that she, like all other electronic devices in this world, is both aware of her existence and also kind of forced to fight against her programming a bit. Tim asked Daria to take her to Merlin, and she can't. She isn't allowed to do that or give him any more information beyond that because of Directive 19, but she can kind of cheat, and she does cheat a little bit.
Yeah, she does, and then she immediately starts breaking down in the way that we have witnessed with other robots who try to make themselves useful despite their directives. And because we read the story, we recognize this for what it is, and it makes us sad.
Yeah, and then this is when I climb back on my soapbox and say, this is why you read this book at the end of the series and not in the middle, because I think if you come off book 4 and all you know about the electronic devices in this world is the train,
right,
is Blaine the Mono, I don't think you understand this as much. And obviously we because we've read the last 3 books of the series, know what the clanking and clunking is, right? We understand what's happening here. We understand that she's breaking the rules and is destroying herself for it. Right. And I think it's so important that we do that, because obviously I've never experienced what it would be like reading this, not understanding that. And I think you kind of get the point eventually, like you understand that eventually Daria dies, right? And we kind of understand why she dies. But I just think the moments wouldn't work as well if we didn't have a clear picture from the other books. Again, this is written from the perspective of someone who's read all those books already and knows exactly what is happening to Daria when she says something and then we hear clunk. That's the way it's written, and so that's the way we should read it.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure that it would have been clear to me that what she had done exactly if I didn't already know that this is kind of how robots work in this world.
Yeah, and I think that's so important.
Yeah.
I love that King complicated the robot stuff, right? Like at the end of book 4, we had this very clear idea of technology bad, right? All these AIs have gone crazy and they're all bad. And even in book 5, we get Andy a little bit. But since then, we've gotten more and more little bits and pieces of these robots that are more complicated. And you pity them and you feel bad because they got this directive and this programming. And to break it hurts them, right. Physically hurts them.
Yeah. It's something we haven't really talked about, is the idea that I think pretty much every robot in this story is, I don't know if I want to say remote controlled, but they all basically have like an antenna somewhere that implies that they're connected to either some central hub or some hive mind. I don't know where to go with that right now. It seems like a big idea. I don't know what to do with right now, but
yeah, I mean, there's this idea of control, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of resisting that kind of control.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because, you talked about, this is a total tangent, I think, but maybe I'll try to explain how I'm getting here. But you talked about the openness of people and how that is aligned with the white. And this is a kind of artificial hive mind in that built through technology. And we see that it is inherently destructive, that it is kind of like, in many ways, what technology has tried to do in the concept of the story is replace magic, right? Like, we don't have the power of magic, so instead we'll do these things. That we don't have an actual bear guardian, so instead we'll make like an android type thing. And it is always worse. It is always less efficient. So that the robots kind of serve as this attempt at this hive mind, attempt at this communal understanding that communicates through satellite dishes and through transmissions, but it is just not the same.
Yeah. And it seems you could even argue that it's provided like an unintentional means of nefarious control. Like it kind of seems to me like Directive 19 is something that like the Crimson King and his agents came in and just put in later to be like, we want to make sure that the good guys are always at a disadvantage, and so they can never get help from robots. And so we're basically going to put this rule in where if anybody asks any questions about the beams or Blue Haven or the tower, then the robot won't help them.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah.
So everything seems to be looking up for Tim, right? He's got his companion now. He knows where he's going. And then he runs into a Throcket of Thraken, and they're all dancing and pointing their muzzles north. And we know what that means. There's a Stark Blast coming.
That's right.
And as they hurry on to try to get to the Dogan faster than the Stark Blast comes to them, Tim sees some wild things. There's kind of a montage in this moment. He sees giant mushrooms, red birds, blue deer, beautiful sights. And then we witness kind of Daria move from being this thing he has to his companion, his friend. And I love that moment where he's trying to figure out where to go next. And she says, "I advise speed, Tim." He had several times asked her to call him by name rather than as traveler. This was the first time she had done so, and it convinced him. And that's just it's a little thing. She just calls him his name.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, I love Daria.
Yeah. No, the king is so good at endearing you to creatures very quickly here. And yeah, I mean, this journey continues to be so full of these fun, exciting moments. And I mean, from a strictly storytelling efficiency point of view, you know, King could have just rushed us to the finish line, right? He could have just been like, after that, it was a short, 3-day journey to the Dogan or whatever. But no, like he's like, no, we're gonna have some fun twists and turns in here. We're gonna have a thing that he has to precariously walk across while the Stark Blast is coming.
Yeah, with fucking tentacles reaching out of the beautiful little thing of flowers. Great moment. Yeah. I loved that moment.
Yeah.
So Tim does hurry across that gorge and gets it through a waterfall and into a cave on the other side. And in this cave, we get a notice on the wall. And I think this is really interesting, and I want to talk to you about this for a bit. So written on the wall is John 3:16, "Fear hell, hope for heaven, man Jesus." And we see that there's a skeleton in here, so we're kind of left to imply that this is the guy that wrote this. And I mean, this is interesting, right? So John 3:16, I think, is one of the most quoted passages of the Bible ever. But here it is. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." So, I mean, obviously we've talked about Christianity in relation to the series a lot, that there is a version of the Christian Bible exists in this world, that Jesus exists somehow in this world. It is really interesting that we see John 3:16 here, and the person wrote John 3:16 and then wrote "Fear hell, hope for heaven." It's just so fascinating to me.
I'm not sure there's a lot of interesting possibilities. Like, it's number one, that doesn't seem to be the message that I take away from believe in Jesus and you get to go to heaven. There's nothing about hell in there, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no. If the next line, "If fear hell, hope for heaven," is supposed to be like a summary of the main idea of John 3:16, I think the person got it wrong, right? Like it is. Hope is not supposed to come into this line, right? The line is, if you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus, you don't have to hope. You're going.
Right.
You're going. That's the deal. But I think it's really interesting. Like, if we frame this once again, this is a fairy tale, like, that was collected into a book, and we know how rare books are in this world. And it was a very popular one for Roland. And in the fairy tale, the character takes time to look at a sign that says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son." Right? There is a portion of this that you could focus on this quote and say, God sacrificed his only son, named JC, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. So he sacrificed the son to save everyone. Right? Roland internalizes this because he has read the story over and over again as a kid. Probably knows this passage himself, right? We have to assume that he knows this passage. And if he didn't know, like, Mom, what's John 3:16? And she'll tell him, whatever. So, I mean, it's really interesting to think about that, right? Like that a core of Roland's understanding, a core of his excuse for this whole adventure has been must save world. And as we've talked about many times, that is not true. That is the lie he tells himself. But here is that lie, right? Like, for God so loved, I am just doing what God did. I am sacrificing my JC, and so that the world might live.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know quite. I think you're definitely onto something, and perhaps just completely correct. At least a part of this might even be King asking us to think about, you name Jake Chambers, and we know that Stephen King knows that if you name a character JC, then they're supposed to be compared to Christ.
Yes.
That's like he sort of says that as a joke, but also he wouldn't do that unless it was an intended comparison.
Especially when they die for your sins and they're then resurrected.
And then die for your sins and then are resurrected and then and then literally die for Stephen King's specifically sins. And then don't get resurrected, which I guess that means he ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father.
Yes.
Who in this case is Stephen King.
Look, I mean, the bottom line is I'm fishing here, but I mean, it just struck me, right? That like, there's nothing is learned from this. Like, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter to the overall plot. Tim just kind of reads this and goes, okay, and then moves on with the rest of the story. And that is the kind of stuff that sticks out to me almost more, because you have to ask yourself, okay, why do we do that? Why did we do that, Stephen? Like, why was that necessary? Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've talked about the fascinating things about what in this religion, this version of this religion, made it down from however long ago it was to present day Roland, and what he understands of this religion of God, of Gan, and what he does not. And a passage in which we're highlighting, like, God gave up his son for us is really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, especially when it's juxtaposed with like fear hell, hope for heaven, you could say that refers to his whole journey.
Yeah.
Because he sort of is trapped in hell.
Yeah.
But he does have a hope for heaven. And you, the reader, when you finish The Dark Tower, you're kind of like, well, that sucks, but I have a hope that he will someday break free of this. Yeah, that's very interesting. And since this does seem to be the episode where we're talking about things that we could have talked about at any point, but are waiting till now to for some reason.
I don't know how that happened. It was not planned.
Yeah. There's just the phrase, man, Jesus, it was something where I was kind of always waiting for the story to explain to me what that meant. And then I, at a certain point, realized it never was going to. That's just, but like, man, Jesus, you can imagine, talking to a priest and, offhandedly using the phrase man, the man Jesus, and the priest perhaps finding it mildly sacrilegious and at the very least quite confusing. Because like the whole point of Jesus, at least in the faith that you and I grew up, is that like he's God. He is God. He's like one of the faces of God, or there's different linguistic ways of phrasing it, but he's definitely not a man. Like that's pretty clear. Again, I think this probably varies between sects of Christianity.
It certainly does. Yeah.
But But like calling, I don't think any real earthly religion calls him the man Jesus. And so what is the point of that? I think the point of that is to refer specifically to the humanity and the human nature and possibly like the flawed nature of the savior figure. Like he is a man. He's a man like us. He's the man Jesus. He's also a savior. He's also, he is a man, but he is, better than us, but also one of us. I'm guessing because the story doesn't really tell us. But if I were to guess at what why they say the man Jesus, then it would be something like that.
Yeah, no, I like that. I've actually never really sat and thought about like the King's choice to call the Son of God man Jesus. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think you're right. I think you're totally right, and that's really interesting. And I want to think about this for a very long time because I think we could look at a lot of Roland through that lens. Definitely.
Yeah. Cool.
So Tim gets out of the cave and feels the Stark blast coming faster and faster and sprints the rest of the way to the Dogan. And what does he find there? Well, he finds a small tin building and a giant cage with a tiger in it. There's a giant tiger in it. I'm not going to read all this section, but I think it's really beautiful. Like the description of him getting into the clearing and the way like, I love King says, "Am I seeing that? Am I really seeing that? Gods," he whispered. And then he goes on for like a whole paragraph about the path and the clearing and like the chasm and like all this amazing thing. And you're reading the whole thing going, okay, but that's not what he's reacting to. Right. And it's like King holds and holds and holds. And then he just like, oh, by the way, there's an enormous tiger.
Yeah. Right. I love it. It's great.
So Tim kind of stands in the clearing, flabbergasted, not sure of what he's going to do next. He asks Daria if the tiger is the guardian of the beam, but of course it's not. Daria tells him the guardian of the beam is Aslan the lion, which most people recognize as C.S. Lewis's Jesus Lion from the Chronicles of Narnia. We'll also learn later that the name of the eagle guardian is Garuda. So this is a lot of new Dark Tower mythology here, right? Up until this point, we've only really known Shardik and Maturin are the two guardians, right? So we've got two new guardian names, and hey, they're things that are important in ancient myth and also in storytelling.
Yeah, Garuda, and you can add to this if you know something I don't know, but Garuda is a classical name for a bird-like creature in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain faith, and I believe just basically well known throughout much of Asia. The depiction actually varies a lot between regions and faiths. Yeah. In the place where I spent some of my youth, it was sometimes depicted looking just like an eagle, and then sometimes depicted looking like this kind of terrifying demon dragon thing. But I've always thought the Garuda was an interesting mythological concept because it varies so much while still being recognizably a Garuda between areas. Like it's sort of like a dragon where you can draw a dragon a bunch of different ways and you kind of know it's a dragon. The Garuda seems to be a kind of a similar. I think the one thing that I think of as being consistent between Garuda portrayals is that the wings look like eagle wings. They're feathered, kind of, they just look like an eagle's wings, right? Whereas a dragon is usually drawn with more of a bat's wings, usually, not universally.
Sure.
So that was that's cool.
I have nothing to add there about Garuda specifically. I like that. The balls on King. What he's done here is not only put the Dark Tower at the center of his own story universe, he's put the Dark Tower at the center of all story universes, right? Shardik is a character from another book, right? Aslan now is one of the Guardians, and he's a character from another book. Garuda is a mythological character from, as you said, many different faiths. So we can start to make assumptions about the rest of the Guardians and say they are probably all important gods and or godlike characters from these stories and myths. And so we come to understand why the Dark Tower is the center of everything. And then when King says everything, he's not just talking about his shit. He means everything. And I think that's so cool. I like, this is one of the most fun things that I think we learn from this story is just like this is little bits and pieces of mythos that I just love.
Yeah, that is very fun, especially since it's almost throwaway here, just to be like, yeah, it's Garuda and Aslan, and you kind of smile and move on, but it is fun to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like the series so much less if this became like important plot points instead of just fun world building. Like the fact that the Bear Guardian is called Shardik doesn't matter outside of the importance of how it's gesturing towards how storytelling matters in this universe. And so it makes sense that the other names only matter in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. While we're on the topic of mythology and things connecting into the story and sort of metatextual relationships, I want to talk about the spelling of tiger in this story, because it's apparently Midworlders spell it Tyger. And maybe this is just like the way that people used to spell tiger, and there's not really much to it. But I think that it might actually plausibly be a direct gesture at William Blake's poem, The Tiger, which everyone's probably heard, tiger, tiger, burning bright, etc. So thematically, the poem, The Tiger, is paired with another Blake poem, The Lamb. These are sort of a duality. These two poems are kind of both tracing different sides of the same thesis that Blake was making. And the two poems, they form a thematic tension between beauty and innocence in The Lamb and primal ferocity in The Tiger. And I like this idea because I think that there are parallels to the idea that Tim, he begins as a lamb, he begins innocent, he begins as a child, but he becomes fierce out of necessity, in part a desire to protect himself and also to protect the other innocents in the story. I mean, I really do think that there's some intentionality, some literary intentionality between the use of the tiger in the story and the spelling of it being a marker for that.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea if that's what King was going for here, but I don't care because I love that. I think it's perfect. I really do. I think especially with, this idea that you're absolutely right that a lot of the story is this loss of innocence in Tim. We'll kind of see it directly here in a bit, but this idea that he became something else and it could have destroyed him. And when he makes the choice not to be fierce, not to be violent, not to kill, what happens next? Well, the tiger goes away, right? The tiger turns into a man. That ferocity disappears. And I think that's perfect. So I think you're totally onto something there. Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Yeah. In fact, I have a bit more to say about the tiger, but I want to save it until that moment happens. So
sure. All right. But next what we happen is, because Daria told Tim that the tiger is the magic source of the thing that was here, that was this big source of magic. She tells him that, and she violated Directive 19 too many times, and she dies.
And we're sad.
We are very sad. And once again, I will briefly hop on my soapbox again and say this death works specifically because of the order you read these books in. And I don't think I would have been as sad if we had come right from book 4 reading this. I just don't think I would have.
I think you're right. I agree.
So Tim tries to get into the Dogan, but the door is locked and it requires a key card. And we know that this key card just happens to be around the tiger's neck. So we see next to the cage is an old pail that Tim recognizes. And inside that pail is a key to the tiger's cage, as well as a note from the Covenant man himself. He says, "Greetings, brave and resourceful boy. Welcome to the North Forest Kinnock, which was once known as the Gateway of Outworld. Here I have left you a troublesome tiger. He is very hungry, but as you may have guessed, the key to shelter hangs about his neck. As you may have also guessed, this key opens the cage. Use it if you dare. With all regards to your mother, whose new husband will visit her soon, I remain your faithful servant. Signed RF/MB." For Martin Broadcloak and maybe Man in Black, but Randall Flagg as well. And of course, I mean, my favorite part about this is when Merlin is talking about the Covenant man later, he calls him he of the Broadcloak. So like, again, to go back to our earlier conversation, I'm just imagining like Gabrielle Deschain saying this and then like gesturing with her head at Martin, who's like in the next room. She's like, he's right. And Roland's just like, tiger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all a coincidence, Mom. Mm-hmm. Chill out. It's funny or interesting, I guess, that, Flag is a jerk here. He did set a trap for Tim, but it's like a solvable trap. It's like a puzzle, right? He didn't just lure Tim out into the wilderness where he would be inevitably killed by a Stark blast. He lured him into this specific situation where there is actually a way out, which Tim finds. So, I'm like, is he being a little trickster here, where he's just like, I wonder if Tim will figure it out, or did he just not at all foresee that Tim would actually survive this?
I think he's being, and excuse my language here, I think he's being a little bitch. I think he just sucks. Like, we're going to get to that in a bit. I think he legitimately believed that Tim would pull out the gun, shoot the tiger to save himself. And thus Randall Flagg would have defeated Merlin, the great wizard Merlin, and also doomed a potentially incredible gunslinger to death, because he certainly would have died, because he would not have been able to figure the stuff out without Merlin there.
Yeah, right. And so,
I think he legitimately thought that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a kind of a classic Randall Flagg mistake, actually, is to be completely unable to understand the interior lives of people who are actually good people, and then good wins out because evil destroys itself.
I think Flagg is very good at understanding what people want, but I don't think he's as good at understanding what people need. And I think that damns him.
I like that. So, I mean,
that's what happens in this moment, right? Like, Tim pulls out the gun. He realizes the only way he's going to get this key if he shoots this tiger, kills him, and takes the key card. And then we get this moment. Tim was once more amazed by how right the gun felt. Its function was so simple, so clear. All it wanted to do was shoot. And when Tim held it, shooting was all he wanted to do. But this is it, right? This is the moment, right? This is the moment that the story has been building to. We've had this kid who is turned into this, to go with your imagery, turned from the lamb into the ferocious tiger, given a weapon of destruction, and learned how good it feels to use the weapon of destruction, and then given a clear path to success through the destruction that the weapon grants him. But he doesn't. So he wins by not shooting, by not killing. But this is a gunslinger who wins through putting his gun away.
Yeah. Right. I mean, this is only popping into my head now for some reason, but I do wonder what this means for our framing story, where Roland is, according to me, having a silver bullet commissioned, and he's getting ready to shoot him some shapeshifter.
Sure.
And maybe he doesn't. Maybe he realizes there's been a mistake or confusion, and that's not what happens.
Sure.
Or maybe the boy is the shapeshifter. I don't know, because that would be, I don't have the time to think on my feet and figure out whether that makes sense right now, actually. But
we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. Anyway, I mean, but clearly Roland has never actually heard this story, because the idea of not shooting someone would never occur to him. So.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the most fascinating thing about this for me, because this is kind of the climactic moment. And I think there's a couple things you can read from this. I think either this was a lesson that was taught to the young gunslinger to help him understand that killing is necessary. Death is necessary sometimes, but it's not always the right tool for the problem, right? It's not like sometimes the gun, sometimes the bullet, sometimes death is the right tool for the problem, but that's not always true. And I think it would be a valuable lesson to teach a young gunslinger, right? That you don't always succeed through violence. It's something that I think Roland hasn't quite learned. On the other hand, I in the hands of Gabrielle Deschênes, you can kind of see it as his mother kind of quietly doing some counter programming to her husband's influence a bit, right? Teaching him through the lens of the story that guns grant a power, and sometimes it's better not to use that power. Sometimes the greater power is to stay your hand. And it seems like the lesson of this is exactly that. Sometimes you need to understand that the desire to use this power is given to you via manipulation, which would have been served young Roland really well, right? Because he falls almost into the same track and the same trick.
I like your phrasing of counter programming. If there is a part of Roland that is redeemable by the tower, perhaps that part is only there at all because of Gabriella.
Yeah, I like that, because, I mean, maybe that's why it was so important to the evil side of this whole thing that Roland takes her life, right?
Yeah.
That this is the human part of Roland, the kind part of Roland,
yeah.
and he literally kills it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and we're never, like, the way the loop works is he's never going to be able to undo that, right? Like he doesn't go back far enough to where he's not going to kill his mother, but you can learn something from her even if she's gone still.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that that's part of the reason why we're doing this story right now. Like, again, we position ourselves in the story, and in the story within a story, Roland is reeling from the thing he just did to his mother, and Roland is reeling as an adult from really reckoning with the thing that he just did to his mother for the first time in hundreds of years. And so this idea that, okay, she's gone, you did this thing, you did it, but that doesn't mean you're not truly damned. There is hope, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very much riffing and leaving the boundaries of solid conjecture, but like, maybe, we know that things prior to his kind of loop can be altered a bit. What if, like, the first version of Roland just, like, found out his mother had been infidelitas, whatever the verb of that is, or not verb, whatever, fuck English, and just, like, murdered her, and he was that kind of monster, and then the loop basically was like, well, the evil side, like you said, does make sure that always happens, but it went from he murders her to, like, he accidentally kills her because he's manipulated into doing it.
That's interesting.
I don't know, man.
Whatever. It's fun to think about. I don't know if, obviously we'll never get any idea, right, but it's certainly fun to think about. Right, exactly. I think this part's really important too. Tim is talking to the tiger, and he says, "Sigh, tiger, I offer a bargain. Let me use the key around your neck to open yon shelter, and we'll both live. But if you tear me to shreds, we'll both die. Does thee ken it? Give me a sign if thee does." The tiger gave no sign. It only stared at him. Tim really hadn't expected one, and perhaps he didn't need one. There will be water, if God willed it. I pointed this out because last week I talked about how someone said that phrase to Tim, that, the angry, revengeful, fierce Tim said, "There'll be water if God wills it," and Tim's reaction was, "There will be no water, and God has nothing to do with this." God, and so it does signal a change here, right? That after his moment of greatest triumph, where he chooses to stay his hand, he seems to fully be back into believing of the power of forces beyond his control, which we know are very much in play in the story.
Yeah. It strikes me this is also a very Lord of the Rings moment where the character chooses to spare a creature that is within his power to kill, and maybe he has great reason to kill, but he chooses pity and grace instead, and then he's rewarded for it.
Sure.
But I love how the tiger just acts like a tiger. Like it doesn't act like a man who is a tiger. It's like totally terrifying and inscrutable. Like it doesn't nod. It just stares at him, and you're like having, anytime you spin around tigers, you get the feeling where it's like, maybe if I were in the cage with it, it would like ignore me. Maybe it would just immediately kill me. I have no idea. Like either of those things are equally likely.
Sure.
But so like you and Tim have to just kind of just blindly trust.
I wonder, why do you think that? I mean, do you think that perhaps Merlin's been a tiger for so long that his humanity was being diminished, and it's only over time that it comes back to him?
I suspect that we're going to learn when we get over to our other story that being in the animal form messes with your mind.
Okay.
So I think he's just in tiger mode, and English he can't understand English.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So the tiger, of course, does not kill him, but instead leads him to the door of the Dogan. We see that the key card doesn't work, of course, because there's no power, but the other key around the tiger's neck opens a metal box that contains a napkin, a large white feather, and a bottle. of medicine. The tiger explains in his very tigery way how to unfold the magic napkin until it is big enough to keep both Tim and the tiger alive and warm inside it. And inside this magic blanket, they wait out the Stark blast. So hooray.
Yay, we win.
And I have to read this part. It's a little long, but I think this is like the whole book right here. It was warm beneath the sheet, and the sleeping bulk of his bunkmate made it even warmer. At some point, he slipped down their covering enough to see a trillion stars sprawled across the dome of the sky, more than he had ever seen in his life. It was as if the storm had blown tiny holes in the world above the world and turned it into a sieve. Shining through was all the brilliant mystery of creation. Perhaps such things were not meant for human eyes, but Tim felt sure he had been granted a special dispensation to look, for he was under a blanket of magic, and lying next to a creature even the most credulous villagers in Tree would have dismissed as mythical. He felt awed as he looked at these stars, but also a deep and abiding contentment, such as he had felt as a child, awakening in the night, safe and warm beneath his quilt, drowsing half in and half out of sleep, listening to the wind sing its lonely song of other places and other lives. Time is a keyhole, he thought as he looked up into the stars. Yes, I think so. We sometimes bend and peer through it, and the wind we feel on our cheeks when we do, the wind that blows through the keyhole, is the breath of all the living universe. So there's our name. There's the wind through the keyhole, right? Time is a keyhole, and the wind through is the universe flowing through the keyhole.
Which you could call a story. You could call it the story blowing through the keyhole, or Ka. Yeah,
you could absolutely call it that. Yes,
I love it. I love it. It's beautiful.
I love it so much, and I love framing this as Tim kind of does here, as his reward for choosing correctly, right? His reward for sparing the tiger, not killing when he could have, is not only just living, but like being granted an understanding of the world that no one else has, right? Like, this is a kid who's been through hell, and as we're going to see, like, the world is cruel. Like, he's going to fly back home and see the devastation that the Stark Blast wrought. But there is a power up there. There is something that makes you feel deep and abiding contentment, such as he had felt as a child. There's something that makes you feel warm and good.
Yeah.
And it is that, and the thing is that wind through the keyhole, that breath of the living universe, that the power of, we can say stories, but the power of existence, the power of universe blowing across us. He's been granted a vision of this thing, of this power. And I mean, uncoincidentally, as he dreams of the tower itself, the Dark Tower.
Yeah. Yeah. It's grace. It's the white. It's all these things. It's connected to all these themes that we've been reading about this whole time.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful thing in the midst of a book that I think over and over again, as we've talked about, has talked about the cruelty of the world, the death, the senselessness of it, the sheriff that's going to retire because he just doesn't understand, the kid who's just watched his father get mutilated and has kind of lost everything he knows. The young boy who was tricked into shooting his mother. Like, this is a world that has moved on, and it's senseless, and we don't understand it. But the story is saying here through this fairy tale that no, there's a power here still. There's something here still. And as long as you are true, as long as you stand, to quote the end of the book, like, you can lay witness to that and experience its power, and it will reward you, as we see here. Tim's ending is a happy one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, yeah, the story definitely ends much happier than I thought it would overall. Yeah.
So when the Stark Blast is finally blown by, Tim and the tiger take stock, and then the tiger says, "Hey, give me that medicine." And he transforms into, of course, it's Merlin. You were wrong, Matt. Merlin exists. Not only does he exist, but he's here in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was wrong. Although I admit this is another moment where I'm like, did this really happen? Or like, is this in the story version of the story where everybody wants to put Merlin in their fairy tale? So they're like, and then the tiger was Merlin. And we have no possible way of answering that. And it's probably an incoherent question in some sense, but I still wonder.
It's fun. And I mean, it's fun to wonder, because I love the beat where, like, Tim's asking Merlin, "Hey, so was this guy more powerful than you?" And he's like, "No, of course not." He's like, well, then how'd you get tricked? And Merlin's just like, I was drunk.
Yeah.
And it's so human of him.
Yeah.
I love it. So, and I mean, in classic Dark Tower form, what you're talking about, like the is this really Merlin thing, is made textual in the story as well, where like Merlin's like, if you told anyone that I was out here and would anyone believe you? And
right.
Tim's like, nope, no, they wouldn't.
Yeah. It's the idea that the story takes a life of its own regardless of what really happened. Yeah.
The idea that Merlin is living backwards through time.
Yeah, exactly. Which I mentioned last week, and I thought that was hilarious that Merlin in the story is like, yeah, some people think that, and if I corrected them, they wouldn't change their opinions or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the other things about Merlin is he's a shapeshifter, right? Like throughout the Arthur story, Merlin shapeshifts into different animals to help Arthur, and so maybe this is where that part got started, because he was trapped as a tiger. So shapeshifter / transformed into a tiger and stuck there, column A, column B.
So canonically, this is the Merlin from the Disney Sword in the Stone cartoon. Is what you're telling me.
It's possible. The shape-shifting Merlin isn't just from Sword in the Stone.
I know, but like as soon as you said that, I suddenly pictured this as being that Merlin, and now it is. It just is.
I totally would think that Merlin would get wasted.
That Merlin would totally get wasted. Archimedes the owl is definitely in the story. Archimedes the owl canonically in the Dark Tower. Okay, I have another comment on tigers now, because I said I would talk about that. So as soon as I saw the cover of this book and I saw the boy and the tiger, I was like, no, I'm not looking for Life of Pi, the 2001 novel by Jan Martel. I'm looking for the Dark Tower. Oh, interesting. This is also a book with a boy and a tiger. So in Life of Pi, which they made a movie in out of Life of Pi, which was also very popular. In that book,
I think it won the Oscar, right?
It won at least an Oscar. It did really well.
I think Ang Lee won director for that, for sure.
Yeah. So in that book, the tiger is also a symbol of like self-protective ferocity lurking in the heart of, in this case, a 16-year-old boy, which is the age of Roland in our story, and older than the age of Tim here. The boy in that story, much like in this one, has to make peace with and pacify a literal tiger, but the tiger also serves as a metaphor for his relationship with the monstrous parts of himself. And I really do think there's something to this idea of a parallel between these two stories, where you have a relationship between a boy and a tiger, which is really a metaphor for that boy's sort of growth and negotiation with the monstrous part of himself. There's also other parallels in the story involving mothers and death that I won't go more into for the sake of spoilers. But I did find the book to be just like Life of Pi. I didn't love the book that much, actually. Whatever, that's an aside. Maybe people disagree, but I couldn't help be reminded of Life of Pi by this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling that Stephen read that book. Like, I think King read that book. So
yeah,
whether he's doing this intentionally or not, I mean, and the movie came out the same year this book came out, so there's some fun for you. But I think you're onto something there. I think it could just speak to this broader, larger sense of using animals as metaphor, like just in storytelling. This is like a thing we do a lot in storytelling. We use animals and interactions with animals as metaphors of internal self battles. And I think that is absolutely what's going on here with Tim. And I think whether or not King was turned on to the idea by reading this novel or seeing this movie, I don't think that quite lines up, because like takes a long time to write a book, so I don't think he like watched the movie and then ran and wrote the story and published it the same year, although Stephen King writes really fast, so it's possible. But no, I think you're absolutely right there. I love that. It did not occur to me to think about Life as Pi, and I have not read that book, but I did see the movie, so I think the parallels there are certainly there. Yes.
And that's also a book that's very much about faith, and that's a concept that has come up a bunch in this conversation as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do wonder if, it seems to me that there's at least a thread of that story in this one.
So Merlin fills in some information for young Tim here. First, he orders him that he will take the last bit of medicine home to his mother, and that will cure her blindness. And then also he's got to give him that axe.
Yep.
Or give her that axe, rather. Then he tells Tim about the Covenant Man, that trapping Merlin into a tiger form was the Crimson King's bidding, but sending Tim out to kill him was certainly not. And Daddy Crimson King is not going to be happy when he learns what happens here. This is, I mean, I just have to say, we talked about how much of a useless dumbass Randall Flagg is throughout the series. And here's another example of just fucking terrible at his job, Randy Flagg.
Yeah.
It's great.
Hilarious, totally backfired, evil destroys itself. I mean, this is why the death that he gets is the death that he deserves, because he's a fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. So, like we said, Merlin commands Tim to cure his mother and then immediately give her his father's axe. And we get this moment where Tim says, "Why?" The wild tangle of Merlin's brows drew together, his mouth turned down at the corners. Suddenly the kindness was gone, replaced by a frightening obduracy? I've never heard that. I've never heard obduracy before in my life. I don't know how I read these things and just like, I guess my mind just says, yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
it's scary.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Not yours to ask, boy. When Ka comes, it comes like the wind, like the Stark blast. Will you obey? I just wanted to pull this out because you've been linking Ka and the wind like since we started this book, and here's the book catching up with you here.
Yeah, I kind of want to read that in the Disney Merlin voice though. Not yours to ask, boy. But yes, no, Ka like a wind. I knew it.
Merlin then sends Tim home, handing him the feather of Garuda and creating a magic carpet out of the napkin that kept them both warm. And so Tim flies back to tree.
Yep, magic carpet moment felt very satisfying to me. Just kind of bringing this fairy tale to a close with this kind of fairy tale element from different cultures. Not a Western fairy tale element, but still feeling very in keeping with the fairy tale genre.
Definitely. On his way home, he sees the devastation wrought by the Stark blast. The land is dead. The muty people of the Fangonard are dead, and even the dragon that spared him is also dead. And we get this wonderful line here. It was not fair. It was not fair. It was not fair. So cried his child's heart. And then his child's heart died a little, for that is also the way of the world. It's really sad. But as we talked about, this is a coming of age story. But I think it's interesting that this fairy tale breaks our heart with the cruelty of the world, but then reinforces us with, okay, but sometimes there's a power out there that makes things okay sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes there's grace, yes.
So Tim gets back to town and sees that while the Stark blast did hit tree, it wasn't as bad as in the forest itself. But of particular note, the sawmill where Tim had resigned himself to a life of misery and obscurity has been blown into the river. The sawmill itself is gone. This is, to me, I laughed out loud when I read this because it's like a really clear way of symbolizing that Tim's life will not be the terrible, depressing life that he saw for himself.
Yeah. Fuck you, sawmill. Love it.
Yeah. Tim gets to his mother's house and cures her blindness with the drops, then gives her the axe as he was asked to. I just wanted to point out that in this fairy tale, the good Gunslinger Tim was able to save his mother. Mm-hmm. Not so with the story of Roland Deschain, right? Right.
Yeah. Honestly, to tell you the truth, got to keep thinking about that boy sitting in the jail cell with Roland and the theme of patricide, and I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, yes. Let's just move on.
Well, then he goes to wake up the widow Smack, who has been staying there, taking care of his mother while he was gone. But he finds her throat slit. It was Byrne Kells who done it. Matt, why did the widow Smack why'd she have to die here? Why?
Yeah, I mean, he saves his mother, but he does lose his female mentor figure. And as for why she has to die, I mean, I guess I do feel like if nobody had died, it might have felt too clean, too pat, too easy. He went, fundamentally, he would have gone on a fun adventure and there was no real cost to it. And since she dies, there is a cost. It is sad. Like, I did feel sad. I was like, damn, damn it, I really felt that. I cared about her as a character. So
it's interesting that the story does kind of wave it away as she's she did her purpose and she's been suffering for like 3 years. Like she's been miserable. She's been slowly rotting away and dying herself. And so in a way, Kels did her a favor. I don't know how much I want to actually like grab onto that and say, yeah. But it is interesting that the story does that.
Yeah. I mean, it is a fairy tale is what I'll say. So like, yes. I don't know. I feel like in a quote unquote normal Stephen King story, he might not try to give it that edge of like, it's actually okay. Like it might have left it a little bit harsher. But you know, it's a fairy tale.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it under the conceit of that story, it is like we're moving on to the happily ever after. We don't want to focus on the tragedy of this.
Right.
So Kels is there and he grabs and starts to strangle Tim to death. But before he can do so, his mother buries her old husband's axe into her new husband's head. And it's awesome.
It is awesome.
But I mean, again, this is like, it's symbolically powerful because like the four things as defined in the beginning of the story come back and they're all present here to save the day. Right. But you know, there's a gun in this room and we don't have the gun kill like that. Yeah. It is so interesting that it is a weapon that means something personal to this family. It is not the gun that does this.
Right.
And that seems like a powerful choice here.
Yeah, I mean it's their tool of their livelihood, in fact, and it's almost a perverse use of this axe to use it this way, but it does bring them justice. I mean, I think it's a much better symbol, and of course accompanied by a sick one-liner to boot.
Of course.
But yeah, no, I agree with you that it's interesting that we have this massive, you know, quote unquote awesome gun introduced into the story, and it's used one time against like a literal monster, and then every other opportunity where it could be used, it is explicitly sidelined. And
I mean, I think that's important to how the story ends, right? Because the story ends with Tim and his mother heading into town to tell the constable about what has happened here. Before they go, Tim goes and picks up that gun that got tossed aside in the struggle with Kels. So he picks up his gun and is a gunslinger.
Yep. And of course, we have to talk about the fact that the story explicitly basically says, and then he grew up to be a heroic, badass gunslinger who served the weak, which really emphasizes the kind of spin that we've talked about, that Gabriella is maybe explicitly trying to cultivate her son into being a more, you know, good person.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last week, but we just know so little about her, right? We just know so little about who she was and what she believed in and what she wanted for her son. So we kind of have to just fill in the blanks here. And that's the reason I really love this story is because we can do that. We can kind of squint at this and say, she's trying to raise a compassionate, kind, caring son. She knows he's going to be a gunslinger. That is his destiny. He is the son of Stephen Deshane. He is of the line of Eld. This is what he is going to be. But perhaps I can mold him to be a kind one. Perhaps she's looking at her husband and seeing the man her husband has become and seeing, you know, what Farson is doing and seeing the fall of this line and hoping that she could, you know, imprint on her son these qualities that make him the best version of himself, like the descendant of King Arthur in name and in deeds.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
Unfortunately for Roland, it's not the way it goes. But maybe one day, right? That's the wonderful thing about the story is there's still hope. There's still hope.
Yeah. On the next cycle, she will have told him the story 20 times. And maybe that'll finally get it through his thick skull.
Damn it, Roland. All right, that's it for this week on the book. We have a couple more chapters finished up. It's actually a very short little bit of the book left. Only, I think, 47 pages stand between us and the end of this book. So King's going to be wrapping this whole thing up pretty quickly. As I said at the beginning of the show, we won't be covering this next week, but we will get around to it. So you guys can go ahead and finish the book, and we'll catch up with you in a few weeks.
Yeah, and there'll be a baby.
Yes, there will be a baby. Hey, Matt.
Uh-huh.
He could be born on the 19th.
He could.
He could.
Yeah. Ka.
I would name him Roland.
I've already
tried. I was told no.
Well,
so
He's born on the 19th. You'll just have to stand there and say, Ka.
I'll just say Ka over and over again until she passes out, and then sign the birth certificate with the name I want. Do that, Scott. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. And I was never heard from again.
Right. Yeah. And Scott never came back to the podcast. Signed, Stephen King.
All right, Matt, we got to move into our discussion question for the week. So last week's discussion question was, what is your favorite version of the Man in Black in the Dark Tower? And some of you folks didn't listen to me because you picked him from other stories. And so I can't read those answers. I'm sorry.
But there were still a lot of answers. So
There were. Let's go through them.
Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam said, if forced to choose, it's good old Randall Flagg. But they are clearly all the same person and exhibit some of the same characteristics that I love. I could write a dissertation on Flagg, so I'll do my best to keep it brief. In my estimation, Flagg is, in all his forms, a gifted chaos magician. And if he were a D&D character, his alignment would be chaotic evil. Flagg's true power comes from his innate understanding of what motivates people. He is good at understanding an individual's unique belief system and uses that belief system to create chaos in the world around them. He understands that humans respond to ideas that already support their way of thinking, and deftly uses a combination of both truth and lies to play on their beliefs, fears, and motivations in order to achieve maximum chaos and destruction. Flagg is always the man behind the curtain, the worm tongue, the puppet master. He doesn't really do much himself. He gets others to make decisions and take action in ways that maximize chaos. Ultimately, his victims are choosing to do these things. He just provides them with a nudge. I adore that this character loves a good pop culture reference and uses them even when the people he's talking to have no idea what the reference means. He clearly believes that he is cleverer than everyone else and uses these references, half-truths, and disinformation in an I know something you don't know, gleeful sort of way. He's charming and seductive and narcissistic and downright humorous. I've often thought that this character also uses a glamour, similar to a fairy. I think Flagg's glamour plays on people's beliefs. So people see him the way they want or need to see him. There are some people that seem more immune to his glamour than others, like the widow, for instance. But most people's fragile sense of self are ripe for him to manipulate. Very cool. I love it.
Yeah.
I can already tell this is going to be some good answers here, just based on how good this one is.
Yeah, that was really great. And the saddest thing, Matt, is you have no idea. I think we've read an answer from this question or this person before, but you just have no idea how good Baby Can You Dig Your Sam is as a name because it's a reference to a book you haven't read yet.
Okay.
And I think it's a Lord of the Rings and Stand reference all in one. Okay. And it's just amazing. And you just can't appreciate it yet.
I'll appreciate it on the meta level.
Okay.
It's funny how much of this applies to Leland Gaunt from Needful Things. Like just the idea of the chaos magician who is really just getting people to do his dirty work for him. Like that's who Leland Gaunt is. It makes me kind of wonder if Leland Gaunt isn't just another face of Randall Flagg. I mean, I'm leaning toward yes, actually.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah.
I think this is outside of that, which would be a fun thing to consider. I think King loves writing villains like this.
Yeah.
He loves people in dealing with internal choices and having characters that like manipulate and motivate those choices, but still letting people make the choices. He just loves doing that.
Cool.
King really does. So.
Cool.
Next, we have Pear Jane, who says, I love all the Flaggs. How can we not? When Stephen King obviously loves Flagg so much and writes him with so much tittering glee, I was going to pick my favorite pop culture references of his, Hall & Oates at the top. But honestly, I just really love his grotesque death scene. Mordred doesn't get his jokes, doesn't get him, and doesn't really understand why he just keeps talking. So he makes him dig out his own eyes and tongue and then eats him alive. Problem solved. So sorry, Randy, old buddy, old pal. Say hello, darkness, my old friend. You can check out, but you can never leave. It's the end of the world as you know it. It's the last crusade, the final fantasy, endgame. You have reached your final destination, so baby, take my hand. We'll be able to fly, baby. I'm your man. Can you dig it?
Oh, my God.
Pear Jane, that was incredible. Thank you.
That was great. That was very good. It's very, very good send off to dear Randall. All H84001 says, as far as the books, the version I hold dear is the one we meet first, the Man in Black with a capital M. Equal parts creepy, enigmatic, and downright goofy at times, He sets the standard for all future Walters, Flags, RFs, Martins, Merlins, and Covenant men would be judged against.
That's great.
Yeah.
The Amazing Duck 42 says, "Oh man, Flag is one of my favorite villains. I don't think he rises up to his full potential in the Dark Tower books. He comes closest, I think, to the Flag I love to hate while Artet is trekking through Topeka. But you asked us to stick with the Dark Tower, so I'll go with my second favorite iteration, Martin Broadcloak. The sheer balls on that man, openly plotting against your king, an affair with the queen, and then flaunting it, gaslighting child, Roland in an attempted suicide by court. You have to admire the audacity." Yeah, you really do. It's interesting that, like, we don't know what he was getting at with some of this, right? Like, why pull Gabrielle into this thing?
I kind of feel like it's a combination of he can't help himself, but also maybe there is a point to it. Like I don't know. We don't ever really find out what level of like future knowledge he has, but I think part of it is just like he couldn't help himself. Like he saw vulnerability in her, and he's in a position of power, and he went for it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do.
Yeah, but I don't know. Malaklips Asunder says, "If I had to pick a man in black as my favorite, it's hard to turn away from Flag and his full glory in The Stand. But what really strikes me is how I can feel his voice in every version of him. Even though Flag is different from the Covenant man, who is different from our old pal Martin, there is that core feeling in the character that is consistent throughout all the times and places we see him. It just impresses me endlessly how King crafted this character and just peppers him into different situations to kind of move things along in the most devious way."
I like that.
Yeah, that's funny.
Walking Dude 22 says, "I see the Man in Black as a whole package. He's a charlatan and a trickster. Pretty much any time we see him is fun. I enjoy different parts about each of his guises. I like the philosophical fortune-telling aspect at the end of the Gunslinger. I like the mystery and behind-the-scenes menace of his appearance in Wastelands and Wizard. I like the man of action of his role in Magus. He is truly at his best when he is manipulating others." And Walking Dude goes on to say something else that I want to talk to you about for a bit here, Matt. "Your conversation this week had me thinking about Gilead that was. I think I know basically what happened with Stephen Deshane. I imagine that he and John Farson were as close as brothers, like Moses and Pharaoh, or Arthur Eld and Lancelot. I imagine that Farson was older, and Stephen admired him. I like to think both were gunslinger acolytes, and both potentially in line to be Din of Gilead. In the midst of this relationship, there was a girl, Gabrielle Deshane. There was a dark manipulator whose antics led to an apparent betrayal. In this situation, Stephen challenged the line, becoming the youngest gunslinger, while Farson cried off without challenging his mentor, thus was never sent west in disgrace. This is the story I would like to read." So that's fun, right? I mean, there's nothing textual there, but it's fun to kind of build up this idea of Stephen and John Farson. And
yeah. I mean, we know nothing about Farson, so it's completely allowable. And I also do like the idea, the Arthur / Lancelot comparison is fun. And it's like there's nothing like that in the story, even though that is obviously a big part of the Arthur mythos. Yeah. And the idea of infidelity, right, is a big part of the Arthur mythos as well.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's very fun. That's very fun. I mean, I agree. I kind of want Stephen King's take on the Lancelot story, which is what I imagine the Farson story to be.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Like, he just gives us little brief hints at this stuff, at who Stephen is, at who Gabrielle is, at who Farson is. Like, Farson is seen in different points as a freedom fighter and an evil manipulator, right? Like a person that would burn children, and also a person just fighting to free. It's interesting. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah. That's a cool idea. Love it. Pedro Achilles says, "Favorite Man in Black has to be the original Walter from Gunslinger. The original Han shot first Gunslinger, back when Walter was still just Walter and not Martin / Flag / Farson ? And was originally from England." He's basically the same guy we meet in the revised Gunslinger, but less pop culture savvy and more of a mystery. Maybe I just prefer that Man in Black because he was there first. So I don't know what this is really referring to, but it is funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when King wrote the Man in Black and named him Walter O'Dim, I think he is very inconsistent as to how these things line up, and he's changed his mind multiple ways. I think we commented on it, I think after book 2, when he summarizes things and like adds new information to the summary at the beginning of each book. And I mean, there were times when he's made it seem like Martin was just a farson, but I think we've settled on no, that actually wasn't true. So I think Pedro is just having fun with King's inconsistencies with this character and who and what he is and how he's changed his mind. And I think in the original Gunslinger, there was no hint of him being these other people at all. He was just Walter O'Dim, just the Man in Black.
Sometimes I wonder if King isn't having fun with us by just being like, and he was also the court. And you're just like, yeah.
Actually, Roland is the Man in Black.
Right. Yeah.
Otherworlds 1999 says, my favorite Man in Black is anytime he's tittering and spouting incomprehensible pop culture references. It makes me laugh and cringe with apprehension at the same time. It's easy to invoke fear when you're menacing, but to cause it while being silly takes it to another level.
That's a good point. That is a very good point, that like he is an unnerving character, and part of that is his ability to just be like to seem so disarming makes him more scary because you know what's under the surface. I like that. Yeah. The two-facedness really jumps out. Damien to me says favorite version of Man in Black is Walter in Wizard and Glass, hands down. Creepy AF. He gets the drop on Jonas at Seafront by confusing him with his glam. He appears seemingly out of nowhere as quickly as his unnaturally sharpened teeth disappear. Walter doesn't just employ cunning to get under Jonas' skin. He's threatening, familiar, condescending, and cryptic. Like the trickster he is, you can't pin down whether he's a threat to Jonas, but Walter's presence in Magus fills the reader with dread for what it might mean for our quartet. However, as much as I love the mood King creates in that scene with the woody incense in Reimer's seemingly empty room, it's the scene before that really makes this my fave version of the Man in Black. King employs the effective trope of having a character who has already crossed paths with the one in question put into words the dread they felt during their interaction. Only King then subverts the trope. The Pape struggles to find the words to describe who or what he encountered. When Jonas finds him at the Traveler's Rest, Roy is not himself. Jonas finds his behavior disquieting, and it is because the Pape seems so out of sorts and unable to explain himself that we, the reader, are full of his sense of foreboding long before Jonas raps on Reimer's heavy oak door. Yeah, no, I totally remember that scene where you're anxious already just because he has primed us just by seeing how utterly out of his mind the Pape is. It's great.
Yeah. It is fantastic. I really love thinking about Wizard and Glass. Like I was listening to that answer and just thinking about Wizard and Glass again, and I was like, oh yeah, that's my favorite book ever. I love that book. God, it's so good.
Yeah, that's great.
So David L. says, I think I'm in the minority when I say that Randall Flagg was at his best as the Man in Black in The Gunslinger. He is just enjoying the ride and is in constant control of the situation. He is aware of who Roland is and what he will do next. If the Crimson King is an analog to the Dark Tower fan, Flagg is the Stephen King fan. He jumps to multiple dimensions, multiple Stephen King books in order to perfect his dark magic. And like every King fan, he wants more and is never satisfied. Even if the reader has no clue of who he is, we know he is the bad guy, and that's all we need to know for the story. He has the aura of an old Disney eccentric villain, but up to an adult story. I was not a fan of his backstory, but honestly, it's just me tired of having the trope of misunderstood villain constantly around. Flagg is arguably the more powerful force in the King multiverse. That, combined with his erratic personality, made his presence an unstoppable object. The Man in Black could conquer the multiverse, but that would not be fun for him. Instead, it is on a constant cycle of going to a place, staying there for a good time, destroying the life of every town he crosses, and flees to another place to repeat the cycle. By the end of the series, I thought we would get a confrontation between him and Father Callahan, but Flagg was at this point too powerful that the only way to beat him was his own arrogances. The phrase "too smart for your own good" perfectly describes Flagg and every Stephen King fan reading his horror stories.
I like the comparison to an old Disney eccentric villain. I mean, the Jafars and the Ursulas are my favorite Disney villains by far. Like I am not down for this new generation of sympathetic villains. Okay, so
but if you don't make them sympathetic enough, you can't make a prequel story about how they became a villain. Cruella in theaters this year.
Yeah.
Matt, what did you think someone has to go through to decide to murder 100 puppies to make a coat out of them?
I think maybe they just don't give a shit. That's what I think.
Yes.
If they ever do an Ursula backstory, I'm going to riot.
You know it's coming, man.
Ursula is she's just that way. That's who she is. Anyway. Okay. Tiffany H says, my favorite incarnation of the Man in Black is his final one, when he's eaten alive by Mordred Deschain. That's because he's probably the one character in King, maybe in all of literature, I most love to hate, and I think he came to a most fitting end. I can't list all the reasons why I hate him without verging into spoiler territory, but I think the Widow Smack was right on the money when she referred to him as pestilence with a heartbeat. Seeing him literally pull off parts of himself and feed them to a baby were-spider, baby/were spider, the son of his mortal enemy to boot, was immensely satisfying for me. By the way, I love that Matt pictures Eldred Jonas as a shriveled Sam Elliott, because that's who I pictured him as throughout my reading of Wizarding Glass. I can't picture anyone else pulling off that epic stash. Really glad you're keeping on with the podcast. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
That was very nice, Tiffany. Steve D says, have to go with Walter. His ulterior motives are not completely clear and seems to enjoy injecting confusion into everything. If he understands the cyclical nature of Roland's continuous journey, what exactly is Walter up to? Favorite moment specifically, when Callahan awakens at the way station. Just like every scene with Walter, his comments and explanations steer the mind in strange directions and produces more questions than answers. My favorite part of their palaver is when Walter slowly advances on Callahan with a box containing Black 13. Callahan shouts at him, "You're cruel." Next line, Walter's eyes widen and for a moment he looks deeply hurt. Then Walter replies, "I am what Ka and the king and the tower have made me. We all are. We're caught." I just love it, although it boggles the mind. And what the hell? Walter is cruel. He, just like Roland, love using Ka as their excuse. Yes, totally, Steve. Totally with you there.
That's a really good point. Yeah, like the fact that he's hurt by that is such a moment you can just endlessly dig into and be like, what does he think? What does he actually think about? Yeah.
Yeah, he delights in being cruel.
Yeah.
It's so.
Yeah, I mean, what is this whole story that we just read? Is just him, just enjoying fucking with this kid.
Yep.
All right, Steve L. This is the last one. Steve L. says, Walter at the Golgotha is my least favorite version.
So he took a different tactic with this question.
Yeah. He was so evil and manipulating, revealing just enough info to keep Roland playing along, but never enough to truly help him. The whole time Roland keeps talking to Walter, I'm screaming at him, he's a liar, don't trust him, you don't need him. Which, of course, is what we were also screaming at Tim in this week's reading, or last week.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't it, the Golgotha is such an interesting moment, because we, like Roland, are so desperate for information at this point, right? Because we're like, he's been chasing this guy the whole time. He's just killed this kid to get to him. And we're like, just tell us something. Explain something to us. Explain this story to me, because I've been reading the past 200 pages and I don't understand what the fuck's going on. Uh-huh. And so we have this guy who is obviously a liar. He says to his face that he's lying to him. But we also grab onto every single word he says, because we're so desperate for any information. And that is exactly the way Roland is as well.
It's true.
And it's perfect. I love it so much.
Yeah, I love that meta element. Sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone who sent those in. Those were a lot of really, really great responses. Really happy with that. Next week's question is, Matt, you want to read this one? Why don't you go read it?
Sure. Next week's question is, what is your favorite instance of a shape-shifting human in literature?
So many options here. It's going to be a fun one, I think.
Yeah. I immediately think of a few, but then there's probably more that I'm not even thinking of. So
sure.
Yeah.
I did say next week's question. Of course, it will not be next week's question. It will be whenever we're back to new episodes of the Wind Through the Keyhole question, but we will answer or read off your answer. So please submit those.
Yep.
All right, folks, that is it. Next week, as we said, we will have a special episode of me talking about the Stand miniseries with my cousin. It's a fun conversation. I think y'all enjoy it. We did not enjoy the Stand miniseries. So come listen and find out why next week.
Yeah, remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And, in the next couple of weeks before you get another piece of Dark Tower, you might just want to head over to reddit.com/r/doof media and hang out there. There's always some fun threads that are Dark Tower related or other things going on. It's interesting because the subreddit has actually gotten quite a bit more lively, I would say, even over the last few months than it ever was before. I'm not sure why exactly that is, but it has.
Well, because we started telling people about it.
I mean, yeah, you're right. Sorry.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so because season 2 is coming and we don't want you to miss any of that. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And if you like our show and you want to support it, please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Dylan J and DVD Walker 8.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate that. Yes, and we hope you enjoy the stuff we have at that level.
I hope so. That's the other levels of the tower level. You're going to be on so many levels of the tower, like a crazy amount of levels.
Yeah, and you've got so many episodes to catch up on.
If you cannot afford to donate to us right now, of course, that is absolutely okay. We totally understand. You can still help us out, though. You can share this podcast. You can talk about it with others. We got another email saying they found us through a Facebook group. So thank you all that are doing that. We really love those. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from Meaty Tester, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Love it. There was a big gap in my reading between The Gunslinger and The Wastelands, and I was looking for a podcast that annotates and reviews the series to refresh my memory. Kingslingers was the first one I tried, and I love it. Both hosts have incredible insight and catch things I didn't, which makes the series even more enjoyable. Thanks, guys." Well, thank you, Meaty Tester.
Yeah, really appreciate that.
To name. That's certainly a name.
I wonder if there's anyone for whom they're like, these guys literally didn't catch a single thing that I didn't already catch.
I'm sure there has to be. We're not that smart.
Maybe. Well, it's not that we're smart. It's that we take several hours a week to talk about it in detail.
Too many.
Then you find things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
Yeah. But I mean, how else are you going to talk about John 3:16 for 20 minutes?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, folks, we will be back here next week to talk all about The Stand. And we hope you join us for that. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.